You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, Vail Resorts is an $8.3 billion publicly traded company with more than 7,000 employees. It's known as the operator of some pretty legendary ski areas in Colorado and the American West, including Vail, Beaver Creek, Breckenridge, Keystone, Whistler, Heavenly, and more.
Yeah, even though it's called Vail Resorts, about 2/3 of the properties it has in North America are now east of the Rockies, and this is thanks to an acquisition spree over the last 7 years or so. And the highest concentration of resorts are in the Northeast. One of those resorts is Attitash Mountain. It's in New Hampshire.
Hey, Austin Carr, Bloomberg News technology reporter, drew the short straw and had the tough assignment of spending a significant amount of time at a ski resort, writing about it for Bloomberg Businessweek. You can check out Austin's story on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/businessweek. Austin joins us now from our Boston studio. So Austin, you did go to Attitash and spend some time there over the last few months. But what you found is really interesting because some of the skiers there have been pretty upset with their corporate overlords over the past few years. Bring us up to speed on what's going on at Attitash and how that speaks about the bigger Vail Resort story.
Yeah, so Attitash is one of the old-timey New Hampshire mountains that Vail Resorts bought up a few years ago. And this is a resort that dates back to the 1960s, if not earlier. It's one of those sort of places in rural New Hampshire that skiers obsess about despite the icy conditions, the rainfall, the wind. And it was very dated until Vail Resort bought it. They had a lift that was frequently breaking down. It took about 20 minutes to get to the top, at which point people felt frozen. There was bad snowmaking, there was poor infrastructure, bad service, and everyone thought this would be totally upgraded when Vail bought the mountain in 2019. But that didn't happen at all. In fact, the sort of years that I was looking into the story and talking to people around Attitash more recently, they were upset about everything under Vail. They thought they were going to get this huge deluxe overhaul, and anything but that happened. They just actually ended up with pretty mediocre conditions, which you would never expect under someone that owns Breckenridge and Vail.
So what happened, Austin? What does Vail say?
So Vail basically bought the mountain in 2019. What they say is, you know what happened 6 months after the acquisition? COVID hit. We were still figuring out. We bought about 17 mountains in 2019, right before the pandemic hit. And during that process, they had to deal with a huge amount of transition. There was a big global labor shortage. And when you have a labor shortage at a ski mountain, that means you don't have people to groom the mountain, to make snow, to deal with people in line scanning lift tickets. And so they just had to, they basically said that they were always going to invest in these mountains, but it just took a few years to get there. But during that time, there was a massive backlash towards Vail Resort, not only at Attitash, but at mountains around New England and the Northeast, from Pennsylvania, New York to Vermont, at places like Stowe.
Hey, can you talk, Austin, a little bit about Vail Resort's strategy here of picking up a few dozen mountains over the last few years that are definitely not on the same level as what they have in the Rockies and in California?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people associate Vail with powder skiing, big mountains out west, as you noted, in the Rockies. But a lot of their strategies now is based around these so-called feeder properties. These are smaller, local, regional resorts around major metropolitan hubs in the East. And the basic idea is that people learn on these small hills, and then they graduate to an expensive trip out west. So the CEO of Vail, Kirsten Lynch, actually, she grew up around Chicago, started skiing in Wisconsin, which is not a place that you'd think about for skiing, but it has a couple small mountains, one of which they bought up about a decade ago. And they expanded from the Midwest into the East by buying all these regional local mountains, assuming that they could sort of just take, I guess, some of these skiers for granted. The ski pass that they offer, the Epic Pass, is a seasonal pass that's really much cheaper than a lot of the single mountain season passes that you see out in the East. Yet I think there's something that happened with the expectations that Vail has brought to skiers, expecting that sort of highbrow, high-lux quality conditions that they never quite delivered or expected to have to deliver to these skiers out east.
So Austin, I lived in Vail when they released the Epic Pass back in 2008, and it was such a big deal because a season pass to just Vail was over $1,000, and then they come out with this thing that Rob Katz designed called the Epic Pass that gives you access not just to Vail but to so many other mountains that Vail Resorts owned, all for a price of like half of what a pass just to Vail would cost. It was a huge innovation, and a lot has happened in the ski industry since then. There's some really interesting color in your story about the way that the folks over at Attitash felt about Vail Resorts. Talk a little bit about the what happened with the map online, because I think this kind of speaks to the way they felt.
Yeah, I mean, during the process, they really felt like second-class citizens around New Hampshire and Vermont, and especially at Attitash, one person told me, look on Vail Resort's website. And of course, when I went there, they have a big map of all their properties, and Attitash is actually in the wrong place on the map. And it felt to these locals
That's terrible.
People did not, the executives at Vail might not have known quite where this mountain is. It was sort of an interesting process, sort of, even talking to Vail executives about these regional properties. I mean, I talked to the CEO of Vail, and I was just asking her, she kept saying, we want each of these local mountains to have their own identity. And when I asked her what the identity of Attitash should be, she didn't have an answer, just said, talk to one of the locals there. And I think that type of reception, that type of feedback from sort of higher ups in Colorado is exactly what people feel angry about around New Hampshire, and why they had been pushing for so long to get more invested in these properties.
Well, Austin, it's a great story. I encourage everybody to check it out. And also the graphics on it are amazing. So read it online at Bloomberg.com/businessweek. Austin Carr, Bloomberg News technology reporter, joining us from our Boston studio.